Hi, I'm John. Nice to meet you all. I do this talk frequently for industry events. This is a bit of a different crowd, so some of the subject matter might be a little bit off topic, but hopefully you're going to find some stuff that resonates here a little bit. To how many of you does the term agile have any sort of relevant meaning in your lives? Okay, cool. All right, well, we're going to talk a lot about that. Again, I'm John Krewson. I started a company called Sketch Development in Baldwin about 7 years ago. We've grown from an independent consultancy to about 50 people over the last 7 years. We do a lot of coaching and training and software development in the Agile and DevOps space. We coach on modern product management concepts. We're on a mission to change the ways people work together, and we think Agile and DevOps has a big part to play in that transformation. So when I talk about Agile, I'm always trying to find these examples of other organizations that have done it, that embody these concepts in a way that's sort of relevant and that makes sense to people other than these sort of theoretical academic ways of thinking about agility. So I found one in Saturday Night Live, and I want to talk about it. That's me. I'll show this again at the end of this talk if you'd rather wait to find out whether or not you want to connect with me. But I want to talk about Saturday Night Live from an historical perspective, just to sort of set the stage. 1974, this guy, Lorne Michaels, he was an innovator with a vision and a mission. His vision was this idea that he wanted television to speak the language of the streets. If you think about what's going on in 1974, especially on Saturday nights, Johnny Carson reruns are airing, and in the mid-'70s, Johnny Carson's humor wasn't really reflective of the type of humor that you were hearing on college campuses across the country, and Lorne Michaels set out to change that. The problem was Michaels was getting a lot of pushback from producers and executives at NBC because the argument there was you're never going to get people to show up on a Saturday night at 11:30 p.m. to watch your television show. They're going to be out, partying and doing what college students do. History, I think, would tell you otherwise. We've got 50 years of history that says people do come home and watch Saturday Night Live and enjoy a different type of television. So there's also a specific element of Saturday Night Live's history that I want to point out. In 1997, I was a leprechaun on an episode of Saturday Night Live hosted by Sting. There's a completely separate story involved in me getting on Saturday Night Live. It took about 2 years of writing once a week incessantly to the casting director to convince him that this was a good idea. And it was. I've managed to make a career out of it. But if you think about it, this was just one episode we're going on about 1,000 episodes now. We've got 1,000 pieces of evidence in the history of Saturday Night Live to use as an example of how maybe we could run our businesses a little bit differently. There's about 20 episodes per show. There's about 20 episodes per season. There's about 50 seasons. Every episode is about 90 minutes long. It's actually 89 minutes and 57 seconds long. So there's a lot of rigidity and there's a lot of routineness that goes into the creation of these shows. That's my son, by the way. He's standing behind the Celebrity Jeopardy kiosk as Turd Ferguson's proudest moment in my life. He's now a sophomore in college, but anyway. So yeah, that happened in 1997. I was on the show. And then 25 years later, now I'm running a consulting company in Baldwin. A lot of stuff happened in those 25 years. That's not what this talk is about. I'm happy to give you that history at some point in the future. But suffice it to say, we are a collection of coaches and trainers and software developers, cloud technicians that are helping organizations get better at delivering software every day. So let's talk about this concept, agility. That's what this is all about. The concept of agility has been around itself for about 20 years. And it started as a response to really problematic approaches to delivering software in large organizations where it wound up taking about 10 times longer to get anything out the door, and by the time it got out the door, it wasn't worth anything anyway. So A bunch of people with different viewpoints in terms of how do you get software out the door, got together and said, hey, let's think about it a different way. If we want to boil this thing down, if we want to oversimplify what it means to be agile, it's about this. It's about teams of self-organized individuals. So you start with the individual, and you start with the idea that the most powerful aspect of your company is an individual. If you can put them together in a team-based fashion and let them take care of most of the decisions, you have the starting point for agility. But there's more to it than that. It's about teams of self-organized individuals delivering value continuously, which is a bit odd to think about. So in your organization, there is some unit of enduring value, something that sticks around that you're just pumping value through over and over and over and over again. In an agile world, we're taking teams, organizing themselves around this unit of enduring value, delivering value continuously and frequently, learning from that delivery and adjusting accordingly. So recognizing that we're probably not going to get it right the first time, but we're going to pump something out, we're going to get some feedback, we're going to make some sort of an adjustment, and then we're going to deliver it again. That's really what Agile is all about. We're going to do it until somebody tells us we shouldn't be doing this anymore. Indefinitely doesn't mean forever, it just means we don't know what the end date is yet. Now there's a lot of speculation in the world of Saturday Night Live that end date is coming up in about a year and a half. Lorne Michaels is saying he wants to do this Saturday Night Live thing for 50 years and then he wants to hang it up. So what's going to happen? Are we going to stop having this as a cultural institution in our country, or are we going to call that the end date? I don't know. It remains to be seen. But in the world of Saturday Night Live, the show itself is that unit of enduring value. It's the vehicle for delivering value to the people who either use it or buy it. And who are my SNL fans in the room? Who could care less if Saturday Night Live comes or goes? Cool. Okay. Who has an active distaste for, like an aggressive hatred for Saturday Night Live? Anybody? Okay. It's fine. I would rather have an aggressive hatred than ambivalence. SNL is a value delivery engine. Every single week, they're pumping something that is useful to either a user or a buyer. That's how you break your customers down, right? You've got your users, you've got your buyers. They have different interests, different needs, and the best products are the ones that combine the needs of the users and the buyers. Who are the users of Saturday Night Live? What's that? The viewers, the audience, the laughers. Yeah. What are they getting out of viewing Saturday Night Live? Humor. Yeah, right. They're getting, it feels good to laugh. Who are the buyers of Saturday Night Live? Close. Yeah, right. Ford is a buyer of Saturday Night Live. Apple is a buyer of Saturday Night Live. They're buying your eyeballs. If you're watching SNL, they're buying the fact that you're laughing at SNL so that you have a positive impression in your head about their products and services. That's the way the whole ecosystem works. And for 50 years, from 11:30 until 12:59 a.m., SNL is pumping value through the airwaves to the users and to the buyers. What's interesting is it's owned by NBC Universal, which itself is owned by Comcast. There's a lot of cultural implication in the world of agility and Saturday Night Live as an example, but it's also very interesting to think that as a sort of a startup mentality organization, they can exist and they can thrive in this world where everybody else is walking around with a suit and tie. So yeah, that's Lorne Michaels. Lorne Michaels was a counterculture activist in the 60s and 70s. He came across this idea, I want to disrupt television. It's interesting to see what happens 50 years later to the disruptors. They turn into part of the institution. That's him getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom for humor by Obama in, I think, 2016, 2015, 2016, something like that. He's like the king of late night comedy now. So it's not just Saturday Night Live anymore. Now it's the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, it's The Late Show with Seth Meyers, it's any movie that has ever been funny in the last 20 years. He wrote The Three Amigos. Anyway, so let's talk about the Agile team, because we're going to see this model here replicated in the world of SNL. For those of you who are not Agile aficionados, remember when I said Agile breaks down into teams of self-organized individuals? It basically breaks down into a team that has three different parts to it, And those three parts operate on a hierarchy-less model, all working to provide service to the other two parts. So in any team, you've got a product owner, you've got a scrum master, and you've got a development team, if you want to use Agile-specific language. Basically, you've got this person who holds the understanding of the present and the future of the product, the person who prioritizes what this product is going to be in the future. Supported by what Agile would call a scrum master, you could call it a project manager, you could call it an iteration manager, you could call it a stage manager, which is what they call it in the world of Saturday Night Live. It's basically this person who doesn't prioritize anything, isn't actively delivering the value, but without whom no value gets delivered. It's the greaser of the skids, it's the purchaser of the pizzas, it's the reminder to the actors what your lines are when you're trying to get off book. And then all of this is wrapped up with a development team. Now, we'll call this a development team. That doesn't have to be a software development team. This is a group of people that are actually doing the building. They are the craftspeople that are making the changes, that are making the things exist that didn't exist before. So it's a three-legged stool. You've got the person responsible for the product, the people responsible for the building and delivering, and the person responsible for making sure that these other people have everything they need when they need it as quickly as possible. In the world of Saturday Night Live, it's pretty clear to see Lorne Michaels is your product owner. This 50-year institution, this brand called Saturday Night Live. Lorne Michaels it's still, to this day, is the person who decides what this thing looks like today, what it's going to look like tomorrow, whether A.D. Bryant is going to return or not, who these 4 new cast members are this year. These are all Lorne's decisions, and they have a specific impact on what the show looks like. The cast, we can say the cast is the development team, and then this is Joe Dixo. He was the original stage manager. You rarely would see him on screen. If you did see him on screen, it would be an accident. But the show doesn't go on without somebody making sure that everything was running as it was supposed to. Here's what's interesting, though. You can see this model replicate itself at detailed layers below. So this is Streeter Seidel. He's a writer on Saturday Night Live. If you happen to watch the Jack Harlow episode, they did a sketch called David S. Pumpkins, or actually the sketch is called The Haunted Elevator. But it's the David S. Pumpkins sketch. Anybody not familiar with? Does everybody know David S. Pumpkins? Yeah? Okay. So Streeter Seidel wrote this Haunted Elevator sketch. He, by the way, decided that it should be Keenan and Beck Bennett and Kate McKinnon and Tom Hanks in the sketch. There's a story about how Tom Hanks resisted pretty aggressively this idea that he would be David Pumpkins. He tried to push it off to the next host the following week. But Streeter wasn't having it, and Tom Hanks became David Pumpkins. He designed the set, or at least he explained what he wanted that set to look like. He explained to the camera operators where he wanted the cameras to be. He wrote every single line. Every aspect of that sketch, that beginning, middle, and end in its entirety was up to Streeter Seidel. It was up to Lorne whether or not the sketch got on the air, but down below, one layer below, it was up to Streeter to decide what it looked like. Don Roy King, at the time, was the stage manager, so he's the one making sure that the cast and that Streeter had everything they need in order to make the best version of this David Pumpkins sketch that you possibly could. Anybody ever heard of the term VUCA? VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We're going to see over the next 2 minutes here that we all live in a VUCA world. That's the whole concept of the information age. The information age is a VUCA age, and you can see it playing out probably in your world, and you can see it playing out in the world of Saturday Night Live as well. V stands for volatility. It's this idea that everything is important and then nothing is important. Hurry up and then wait. High priority, low priority. You've got a whole bunch of customers demanding something right now, and then all of a sudden nobody's knocking on your door. That's volatility. There's volatility in Saturday Night Live too, but you see it in a bit of a different fashion. You see it more like, is Norm Macdonald going to be sober when he's doing Weekend Update? Is John Belushi even going to show up? Uncertainty is the idea that we don't know what we're going to be working on next week, or next month, or next quarter, or next year. And we have to plan and organize ourselves so that we can we can deal with that uncertainty so that the uncertainty or the changing nature of our world around us doesn't disrupt us too much. Uncertainty is everywhere in SNL. I mean, just think about whether or not on a Monday when you're planning everything out, you've got a great idea of what your episode is going to look like, but then the Friday before the show goes on, your president tweets something that the world is expecting you to respond to. That's the idea behind uncertainty at SNL. Complexity is this idea that one person's actions have an unintended consequence on everybody else's actions, and everybody else's responses to that action are also unpredicted and unpredictable. Complexity sort of rules the day. The idea of complexity is that there's nothing that we can plan as an antidote to combat what's coming ahead of us. You cannot plan your way out of a flock of geese flying into your airplane. Those are just sort of the variables involved in complexity. And then finally, ambiguity. Do you know if your customers want what you're selling? And how do you figure that out? How does Saturday Night Live know whether what they're putting on this week is going to be funny? How do they figure that out? Also, what's funny to you is not funny to me and is not funny to the rest of the world. So how do you even define something like funny? These are the things that SNL deals with day in and day out and has for 50 years, probably similar to what we deal with when we're running our businesses. The way that they do that and the way that we recommend companies deal with VUCA is by employing empirical process control. Empirical process control is something very different than defined process control. Defined process control is figure out what it is that you want to do, create a very detailed plan of action, and then execute that plan. Empirical process control, on the other hand, is 3 pillars: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Transparency is the idea that you keep everything visible that you're doing, not only the thing that you're building, but the way that you're building it. So in the world of software, if I can use software as an example, not only should you keep the process of the software that you're building visible to all of your customers and to all of your suppliers and to everybody else that's working on what you're trying to build, but you should also keep that process open and transparent as well. You should let anybody who's interested in your software, let's say, see the process that you're using to build it, so that you can open up the second pillar, inspection, so that you can take a critical eye to it as frequently as you possibly can. Once you've got that critical eye, now you can start making adaptations. You can start looking at what it is that you're building and say, not quite right, let's adjust by a couple of degrees. And the more frequently that you can do that, the shorter cycle that you can employ to get through transparency, inspection, and adaptation, the better off you are in managing and dealing with VUCA. So let's take a look at how Saturday Night Live does this. How do they enable transparency? If you watched a few episodes, you can see it's one of the most transparent shows. It's one of the most self-aware shows that's on television today. So, anytime the host is introducing the musical guest, you're seeing the entire studio behind that musical guest. You're seeing the musicians prepare for the performance they're about to give. If anybody saw the Jack Harlow episode, I don't know, recently he had this little break in the middle of his monologue. He went out into the audience to answer some audience questions. Yeah, that's all transparency. It's all built to suggest, hey, we're doing this live. We're doing this in front of you. Don't expect perfection. Just understand that there's a lot of work that goes on in building this thing. One of my favorite stories about transparency on Saturday Night Live, in season 2, there was a new cast member. This is 1976. His name was Bill Murray, and he was hated by audiences nationwide. He got mountains of hate mail because he wasn't Chevy Chase, who had just left the show. And they got through a few episodes. They were heading into the Christmas break, and he was at his wit's end. He was out of ideas. He was talking to his writing partner about what on earth he could possibly do to fix this problem. And he and his writing partner went to Lorne Michaels and said, what are we going to, I'm funny, what on earth am I going to do here? And Lorne Michaels suggested, well, why don't you try just being transparent? Why don't you try pleading with the audience and explaining to them that you're funny? Which sounds like a ridiculous idea. But it actually turns out to be, that's not going to work. We got a audio issue there. Try it again.
I'm Bill Murray. You can call me Billy, but around here everybody just calls me the new guy. I want to thank the producer, Lauren Michaels, for urging me to speak with you directly. You see, I'm a little bit concerned. I don't think I'm making it on the show. I'm a funny guy, but I haven't been so funny on the show. My friends say, how come they're giving you all those parts that aren't funny? Well, it's not the material, it's me. It's not that I'm not funny, it's that I'm not being funny at the right time. Honest. Before, you know, I could be funny whenever I wanted, but now, as a professional, I have to learn to pick my spots, you know? This morning, I picked up my laundry. The guy says to me, Bill, you know, every time you come in here, you say something funny. But I saw you on the show Saturday night, and you stunk. Well, that hurt, you know. Just totally destroyed my confidence. Last Friday, I went to a party with Danny. There was a pretty girl there I wanted to impress, and I'm a party animal. I was very funny. Danny said nothing. He was saving it. She said to me, you're so funny, I wish I had a tape recorder. Well, I wish she had too, you know. Saturday night after the show, when she went home with Dan, I could have played the tape back for her. Now, what I'm asking for is your support. I've gotten some nice letters from old friends and people I owe money to. But from you people, I hear nothing. I'm not asking for letters, but I know this sounds corny, support. I'm a Catholic. I'm one of 9 children. Ed, Brian, Nate, Spicky, Bill, Laurie, John, and Joel. I can say that faster, but I wanted them all to hear their names. I was raised in Wilmette, Illinois, a small mining town north of Chicago. That reminds me of something funny. My father died when I was 17.
You know what, I'm not going to go through the rest of this, but so, you know, imagine employing that kind of transparency in the work that you're doing. It's actually kind of a trend these days to, especially in the software world, if you haven't built the thing that you're trying to sell, to be like, hey, we're building this thing. I think, you know, I think it's a good idea, but we kind of want to get your opinion. So, you know, tell us what you think about these ideas that we have to build this stuff. It certainly helps in figuring out if you're on the right track before you go down this path of putting all this effort into delivering this thing that maybe nobody wants. Okay, great. So we've enabled transparency. Let's figure out how inspection and adaptation are employed by Saturday Night Live using that after we've opened that first pillar. So something that most people don't know about Saturday Night Live, on Monday before the Saturday, so you got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, it's a clean slate. There is no show. There's no script. There's no preparation. It's almost like they're a startup every Monday, 20 times a year. They got a host, but that's it. The way that Lauren has set this show up, he says, okay, host, you're the host this week. What kind of show would you like to have? So the first thing that happens on Monday is what's called pitch. So all the writers and the performers, they're in their offices, just hanging out. And a page will run through the halls and yell, pitch. And that's the signal for everybody to pile into Lauren's office. So Lauren's in there, the host is in there, and then it just becomes this avalanche of concepts and ideas. And everybody's just shouting about, you know, 5 or 6 ideas that they have that they think would be funny with that host. This is, that's Lauren right here. And this is The Rock. He's the host this week. It's Bobby Moynihan's last show, so he took that picture. You're going to hear about 100 ideas in that meeting, in that office. And they're going to hear all 100 ideas. They're going to, does this thing work? Oh, look at that. Yeah, they're going to write them all down. They're going to put them on a board. And then everybody's going to leave, and it's just the host and Lauren in the office. And they're going to whittle that list of 100 ideas down to 60 ideas. Okay, so it's Monday midday, maybe Monday afternoon, and we've got about 60 ideas for the show that we're going to do on Saturday. We have no idea which of these are actually going to happen. Keep in mind, by the time you get to Saturday night, there's only room in a 90-minute show for 10 sketches. Okay, so we're going from 100 ideas to 10 sketches somehow. This doesn't seem like the most efficient way to go about building a show. But you know, in many creative circles, you're going to hear the goal of production is not efficiency. It's to build great products that our customers love. If we can be efficient in doing so, awesome, but let's not lose sight of that goal. Okay, so we've got about 60 ideas. Those 60 ideas are announced, and then once they're announced, that's the signal for everybody to start writing those sketches. Write them word for word. Describe the set, describe the action on the stage, provide dialogue for every character in the sketch. That starts on Tuesday, and it's a purely cultural phenomenon. It starts at about midnight on Tuesday, and it's just a holdover from when the show was fueled by cocaine and marijuana. So Tuesday night into Wednesday. Wednesday is the read-through, and it looks like this. So everybody crams into this bigger room, and there's this many copies of every sketch that are handed out to everybody to read. It's a long event because you're reading 60 sketches out loud. And once that read-through is done, and that's what it looked like in season 45. Season 45 was 2021. This was their attempt at actually having a show when the pandemic was raging. Social distancing and whatnot. Anyway, so you read through those 60 sketches. Again, Lauren and the host stick around, talk through what were some of the good ones that they heard. They're going to get rid of about 40 of them. You're going to be left with about 20 sketches. So then they get into design, you get into some rehearsals, you start taking those 20, get them on their feet, start figuring out where the cameras are going to go, figure out what the set pieces are going to look like. You get through some more rehearsal on Friday. You probably realize once you get a sketch on its feet or two that, you know what, this is not really going to go anywhere. So you might just trash one of those Thursday or Friday, one or two. And then we get to Saturday. And now Saturday starts at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's, we're just running through all of these sketches and running. And then at 8 o'clock Eastern, they have a dress rehearsal. And the dress rehearsal lasts for about 2 hours, so it's about a half hour longer than the live show. But you can get a ticket and go watch it. They pack the house for it, and they perform it as though it were a live show. The only thing they're not doing is broadcasting it nationwide. But they're doing everything else that they would otherwise do if it were a live actual broadcast. So that show goes until about 10:30, which means they have an hour to figure out which of the 20 sketches that they performed at 8 o'clock, which of those are they going to trash, and which are they going to keep, and then what order are they going to keep them. What's interesting is because they're actually doing it at full strength on Saturday evening, you can see that there are many other reasons than just people didn't laugh that you would cut a sketch. That's the main reason. We thought it was funny, but we did it and nobody laughed, so we cut it. But there are other reasons too. Maybe the host was in a lot of them and they just couldn't get him out of this wig and get him into that wig in time for them to do both sketches. So there's some logistical things. And it's not like at 11:30 we know exactly what the plan is. They're still trying to figure out as 10:30 or 11:30 becomes midnight, midnight becomes 12:30, 12:30 becomes 1 o'clock. They may have to make some adjustments because some sketch might take longer than they expected it to. Some laughter might last longer than they expected it to. They have to end the show at 12:59 and 57 seconds in order to keep the rest of that broadcast schedule running. And then by the time they're done with that live show, it's 1 o'clock. Everybody's exhausted because this was pretty much nonstop. So they recharge on Sunday. They only do 20 of these. You take the summer to completely recharge. But it's exhausting. It's grueling. Season 45 was a bit of an anomaly. Does anybody remember watching sketches from the pandemic? Was it not just the most miserable thing you ever saw? I mean, Tom Hanks trying to give a monologue from his kitchen. Kate McKinnon trying to do some Ruth Bader Ginsburg sketch that didn't really go anywhere. Kenan Thompson trying to do What's Up With That over Zoom. It was awful. And the reason it was awful, I'm kind of glad that it happened in some capacity because it kind of proves without that model of getting from Monday to Saturday, without those repeated attempts at getting feedback and figuring out which ones we need to throw away, without getting multiple eyeballs on it, collaborating, working together to put a sketch together, it looks like trash. So, lesson for all of us. We need to try a lot of these things and figure out which things we need to throw away, probably at a higher degree of frequency than even the ones we want to keep. So the way that Lauren and the production team keep track of Monday to Saturday looks a lot like what agile organizations look like when they're trying to visualize their work and they're trying to keep their work reduced to an appropriate work in process limit. This is what the season Kanban board looks like. Like I said, about 20 shows a year, but they like to break it into smaller groups where they'll do 3 and then take a break, and then 3 and then take a break. And it doesn't look like this at the beginning of the year. Again, it's a VUCA world. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's not like, here we are September 30th. He knows that on May 19th, Tina Fey's even going to be available to host. So here, what is this, the 14th? So they just did the equivalent of this show. They know who this one is. They probably know who these two are, but these are probably blank until they get further down the road, and that's okay. A lot of companies would probably feel very uncomfortable with that level of uncertainty, but that's the world that they live in every day, and they just make sure that they have these visual representations of that uncertainty so that they don't let it go too long. They do the same thing show by show. So at the beginning of the week, this 11th, that's almost like they break this thing into 3 acts. This 11:30 30-minute period, the 12 o'clock 30-minute period, and then the 12:30 30-minute period all start off very long, and visually you can see as they decide we're not going to do that sketch, we're not going to do that sketch, we're not going to do that sketch, this thing starts to shrink and become a little bit more reasonable in terms of getting the show off without a hitch. Lorne Michaels is famous for saying over and over again, we don't go on because it's perfect, we go on because it's 11:30. That's a really good lesson, I think, for entrepreneurs, small businesses, anybody trying to get stuff done to hear, and they get to hear it every week. The structure of the organization of Saturday Night Live is sort of built on this mantra. And you know what makes it work? Even if it isn't perfect and it goes on, they've enabled that transparency in ways that sort of lets you as an audience forgive them for being imperfect. In fact, when it is imperfect and an actor decides to laugh at something that's going on during the sketch, you're right there with them. They've further enabled that transparency, and they've brought you in on this journey with them, and you love it. This is Eugene Lee. He is a set designer. He does a lot of sets for Broadway productions, and he does all the sets for Saturday Night Live, has for decades. He's got an interesting theory and an interesting philosophy about his role at Saturday Night Live. He will tell you that at the end of every week, he completely disassembles every set at the end of the show, which is strange. You would think that, well, you've got Celebrity Jeopardy, you've got Weekend Update, you've got all these other sketches you know you're going to do week after week. Why would you not just keep it around and make your job a little bit easier? Well, it kind of gets back to that whole idea of it's not my job to make my job even easier. It's my job to make their job even easier. And if that means my job has to be harder as a result, then so be it. In our world, when we're coaching our customers to try to understand this concept, we refer to it as sub-optimizing locally to optimize globally, to be a little bit less efficient in the work that I particularly am doing in pursuit of making this overarching thing that we're trying to get done a little bit more efficient. So when we're talking about software design, for example, software developer should never say, I'm sorry, our software wasn't designed to do that. The software developer should always be able to say, our software is designed to do whatever you want it to do. And the same holds true for set design. We never want, he says, we never want to be in a position to say, I'm sorry, writer, I'm sorry, actor, our sets weren't designed for you to put that sketch on. You should be able to put on whatever sketch you want to. And if that means we have to break the set down completely every week, then that's what we're going to do. There are 3 sets that don't get completely disassembled. Can you take any guesses as to what they are? That's one. It doesn't probably. I don't think. Sure. Okay, 4. Any others? Maybe that is 3. Yeah. Nope, not Jeopardy. Yeah. Imagine if they wanted to do something different. The only other one that doesn't get completely disassembled is the Oval Office. Yeah, they figure, we'll get enough of a heads up if they redesign the Oval Office. Yeah, that's the shipyard in Brooklyn where they build all that stuff. You can see it's all just complete tiny little parts. Anyway. That's Darrell Hammond. Darrell Hammond was, speaking of Celebrity Jeopardy, he was the S-words. What's the guy's name? Sean Connery, thank you. Yeah. He was also Bill Clinton. He was, at one point, he held the record for the longest tenured cast member. He was a comedian in Florida growing up before he was on SNL. And he never thought he was all that talented, but he knew that he had a good work ethic. And I think this is just perfect for the type of work that we do. If you think about it this way, he would always say, you know what, I don't have the talent to compete with my fellow comedians, but I do have the ethic to outwork them. Because he grew up in Florida and all of his gigs were in Florida, he could drive from one coast to the other coast, and in a matter of hours, he would spend a lot of time in the car. So think about like Fort Lauderdale to Tampa to Miami to Jacksonville. You know, he's always driving. And he says, if I could just pick one thing to get better at in every drive, it's about one drive a week, then I could pile those improvements on. And you know, if I get better at 50 things over the course of a year, that's like 250 improvements over 5 years. Even if it's something as minute as, you know, just perfecting my lip bite when I'm doing Clinton, or the way I pronounce my R's when I'm doing Jesse Jackson, something like that. 250 improvements over the course of 5 years. You know, I think I can beat my competition with that kind of work ethic. We refer to continuous improvement as most recognizably in the Agile world as a retrospective. It's that opportunity to just get a little bit better, but you can't ever turn that off. Continuous delivery looks a little bit different when you're dealing with a live broadcast show. We talked about that dress rehearsal as an opportunity to find out what this thing's going to look like to a small subset of your larger audience to make sure that what you've delivered is the right thing. Facebook does this. Instagram does this. I don't know if anybody uses Instagram enough to remember when there was that day when instead of scrolling up and down to see your feed, you would scroll left and right. I don't think we all saw that. Maybe some of us saw that, but that was sort of the same concept as a dress rehearsal. You just show that to a few people, find out what kind of feedback you get, and then make a decision about where to go from there. There's a ton of features that have been built by companies like Instagram that never show the light of day because they found out from the small subgroup of people that they were working with that people didn't like that feature. Just like the 20 sketches becomes 10 sketches for the live broadcast. Doesn't mean you shouldn't build them. It just means you shouldn't show them to everyone before you make that decision to open it up to everyone. Let's talk about that self-organizing team. Anybody familiar with the concept of team formation, forming, storming, norming, performing? There's this notion in team development that suggests that teams go through these 4 stages in pursuit of becoming a high-performing team. The first step is you've formed as a team. You look around and you're like, oh, okay, this is my team. The next step is you storm. So this is where a lot of conflict within teams occurs. Kind of pushing your limits, figuring out who you are, what your role in the team is. Then you start to establish some norms on the team, and you start to realize, okay, if we work this way together, then better things tend to happen. And if you can assemble and you can collect enough of those norms in your favor, then you can say you've become that high-performing team. There's a story that the original cast of Saturday Night Live tells about when they realized that they became that high-performing team. It was episode 6 or 7. Buck Henry was the host. Buck Henry, by the way, is credited with the idea of the recurring character on Saturday Night Live. So he told Lorne, Buck Henry, he wrote The Graduate and a whole bunch of other, he's like a screenwriter. He told Lorne, he said, hey, I saw that samurai sketch a couple of weeks ago. I want to do one of those. And Lorne's like, we don't do that. Once the sketch is done, it's done. He's like, I don't know. I think you might have something there if you just like repeat these characters. So he did, and the rest is history. Anyway, so he's doing Samurai Delicatessen on a live broadcast. And at one point, John Belushi pulls his sword out and swings it in the air, and he clips Buck Henry in the forehead. And he just starts bleeding all over the set. I mean, it's his forehead. He's profusely bleeding. You can't find it now. You can only find the dress rehearsal version of this sketch. Anyway, at the commercial break, they put a huge Band-Aid on his head, and he's got to wear this big Band-Aid for the rest of the sketch. Nobody says anything. None of the cast members say a word about it, but the next sketch to air, Lorraine Newman here decides she's going to go on the air with a big Band-Aid on her forehead. And the other cast members are looking at her, and their next sketch, Dan Aykroyd comes out with a big Band-Aid on his forehead. And then everybody else just decides to adopt this norm of Band-Aids on the forehead. And they go back and say, and not a word was spoken on air or maybe afterwards, but they look back on that as that was the day that we decided to become a team. Because somebody just did something and everybody else just followed suit and said, okay, I see what you're doing. I accept it. I'm going to move it forward. I talked a lot about Lorne Michaels. Here's my opinion. We talk a lot about Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Those people are outliers. They're about as far from an example that we should follow as you could possibly get. But there are examples of performance excellence, of leadership excellence that I think are a little bit closer to home that we could follow that aren't so far on the power law distribution that they become inaccessible. Lorne Michaels. We don't go on because it's perfect. We go on because it's 11:30. That's realism and pragmatism in practice. I think we should all follow it. He believes that producers are supposed to be invisible. The cast has to inhabit their own decisions. That is, in producer speak, that is exactly what leadership is supposed to look like. If you are a leader of a team and you have figured out how to make your team believe that all of these great ideas were their decision, you've got it figured out. That's really all it's about. Always make them feel like it was their idea. And you can be invisible and you can be in the background. If you feel like you have to take the credit and you have to be the one in the spotlight for all of these decisions, you're squeezing it too tight. Organize loosely, you never know what will come up. That's sort of the mantra of his entire structure of getting from Monday to Saturday. We don't know that we're going to be able to pull it off. The guy's got emotional intelligence that's just sort of off the charts. That was his quote to the press when they were asking about, are we going to see Saturday Night Live in season 46? This is when they were back on set. There was a lot of pressure being put on Lorne and the cast that season because the way that you had to pull the show off was you had to get tested in the lobby, and then you go up in the elevator, you get tested again. And as long as nobody tests positive, then you can have a show. But as soon as somebody gets, as soon as somebody tests negative, as soon as somebody tests positive, then they shut it down. So he just wanted to make sure he was saying on the record, loud enough for his cast and for his team to hear that he gets it. It's not, I'm not dismissing how hard this thing is. I think it's another lesson to be learned, another leadership lesson. Don't dismiss how hard some of this stuff is that you're asking your teams to do. A lot of this stuff is really, really hard. People have to be bad before they can be good. If you're expecting perfection day one, you're not giving your people an opportunity to fail, an opportunity to look good and figure out, oh, okay, here's a way I could make this look a little bit better. You're selling your people short. Dress has to be bad before the show can be good. Your product has to be bad before it can be good. But you have to make it bad so that you can get the feedback that says, here's why it's bad. But there are some glimmers of hope in here. If you're the smartest person and you're in the room, you're in the wrong room. That's a growth mindset quote, if I've ever heard one. If you are always the smartest person in the room, you're not growing, you're not getting better, you're not finding any opportunities to improve. And you should put more energy into taking care of the cast than anything else. As we could see, this is something that he learned over the decades. Put a little bit of effort into keeping Belushi alive. A little bit more effort into keeping Chris Farley alive. And man, oh man, he's trying hard with Pete Davidson. You can ask for anything in the world except to be appreciated. This doesn't really have anything to do with anything. I just thought it was a cool quote. Somebody once mentioned that quote and referred it to like driving in traffic. You can let somebody in front of you, but just because they don't wave and say thank you doesn't mean you shouldn't have done it. Anyway, so now that we've seen what it's like to get a show on the air at Saturday Night Live, hopefully this definition of agility means a little bit more than it did before we started. Agility is about teams of self-organized individuals delivering value continuously and frequently, learning from that delivery, and adjusting accordingly indefinitely. Sketch Development is a consulting company that provides training services, coaching services, software development, and cloud management services for 50-person companies to the Fortune 50. Hopefully now it's obvious why I named the company Sketch. Yeah, and if you want to learn more about any of this stuff, I'm a bit of an SNL nerd, so I've read just about every book there is to figure all this stuff out. Who's got questions? Cool. Yeah.
Is there anything particular that got you originally excited about SNL? Is it around your family?
Yeah, good question. You know, that episode, it was March of 1997. I got there at 10 in the morning. We hung out the cast was so big at the time that they didn't have enough dressing rooms for everybody, so half of the cast was in these makeshift plywood boxes in the set of the Rosie O'Donnell show. And just hanging out there for the entire day, ran through rehearsal after rehearsal. 11:30 comes around. By the way, nobody tells you whether or not your sketch is going to make it from dress to live. If they don't tell you to go home, then your sketch is on the air. So, 11:30 comes around. I'm still there, so I'm like, okay, I guess we got picked. Midnight, 12:15 comes around. We go do the sketch, and then we all just kind of scatter. And I'm just looking around like, I got a headache. I thought this was going to energize me and propel me for the next 10 years because it's what I had always known I was going to do since I was in 4th grade. But it was kind of at that moment I realized I don't think I really want to do this. I think I'm more just like a obsessed fan. So yeah, I got started in 1984. I saw Martin Short do something ridiculous, and I'm like, oh, okay, well that's what I'll be doing for the rest of my life. It was also the same year that my dad came home with an Apple IIe, though. So it was the same year I learned how to code BASIC because the neighbor friend taught me how to do it. So at that point, it's like 1984 was the year that I kind of solidified my future as a computer scientist and a SNL fan and actor. Yeah.
What's the biggest hurdle you've seen large teams? What's the biggest hurdle that you've seen, or what's the most common hurdle for large teams that you've seen to implementing agility correctly?
Well, I mean, if it's a large team, I think that's the biggest hurdle.
Okay.
So.
I guess large companies.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I'm kind of a heretic when it comes to agile at scale. I don't think it's possible. I think large organizations are better off figuring out ways to make small, like 10-person max groups of people be able to do this stuff independently without having to worry about the other 1,000 people that are around. That's why we talk about being an agile and a DevOps organization, because DevOps to me is probably the best route to that independence, because it's about enabling that independence through software. Who else? Yes, Chris. Yeah.
So when did you realize that the way SNL puts on production is how you wanted to organize your company? Or that there were some of the similarities?
Yeah. So I think it was, yeah. So a little bit about the 25 years in between. I'm from St. Louis. I guess my adolescence was here, so I think that counts, right? I went to Mizzou. I met my future wife at Mizzou. She was 2 years older than me. She moved to New York. I dropped out of Mizzou. I had chased her to New York. That's when all of this happened. I had done a lot of, I was in a McDonald's commercial with Brett Hull when I was in hall school, and I did a bunch of other plays and commercials and stuff like that. So I just assumed that was, it was all going to work out and be struggle-free in New York. But at some point, the lifestyle in New York became so much of a grind that I thought, well, how about I switch my hobby and my career? So I became a developer professionally and an actor as a hobby. And that led into some leadership roles in these organizations. And there was a moment when I was like, wait, all of these things that I'm trying to get done as a leader of software professionals just beating my head against the wall because of the way they're telling me to lead these teams. It's so much more effective if I just take these leadership lessons that I learned from directing theater or being an actor in a play. And as soon as I started abandoning that traditional set of management theory and started using some of these leadership concepts here, then everything started making sense to me. Actually left the corporate ladder and decided to become an agile consultant. I worked for a company called Version 1. They're like Jira. They make software for agile teams. So I got to travel the globe and see what software development looked like from company to company. And yeah, basically took that idea and said, well, let's try it on my own. For a minute, I thought I was just going to be an independent consultant. I thought it was going to be a one-person show. But I kind of missed the software development piece of it. I kind of missed the product development aspect of it. So that was sort of the thing that made everything make sense. And as soon as I realized this idea of teaching some of these wildly radical management concepts, leadership concepts, pairing that with the idea of building our own software or building software using these concepts for our customers, then the idea behind Sketch started making sense. What else? Yeah. Yes, you can. I have a link. It's a long link, though. It looks like you're ready to write it down. I wouldn't recommend it. I will get you a link. Yeah. And maybe if anybody else wants the slides, we could figure out a way. I bet we could figure out a way for you to get them. What else? What else?
When the writers are obviously outthought, yes, sometimes they have certain things that they keep presenting.
Yeah.
They change it a bit. I mean, week to week, they'll say,
Yeah.
finally, after maybe a year or more,
Just give it up?
place to the top.
Right. Yeah, people ask that all the time. Like, okay, so what if your sketch doesn't get all the way through? What do you do with that? Seems like such a waste. There's this. Sometimes they'll just tuck one away and say that'll be a really good one for when so-and-so hosts. But usually what happens is a writer or a cast member will suggest something. It'll get cut somewhere in the process, and then they'll go a week later, try to get it out there again, and they will talk, we talk about team development norms. The norm at SNL is you're going to get ridiculed for trying to shove old trash into a new show. Like, so it's not, it's part of the etiquette to say, why do you keep trying to force that down everybody's throat? It didn't work last week. They cut it. It wasn't funny. So yeah, I mean, there's a scarcity mindset that they try pretty hard to eliminate there. This whole idea that there's only so much stuff that's funny. Funny is infinite and never ending. It's a bottomless pit. So if you hold on to this idea that, no, this one thing is funny, that mindset is not going to get you very far. If your mindset is anything can be funny, you just have to be open and ready to see it, then you're in a much better position. Yes, in the back first. Hang on one sec. Mary.
So when SNL has a new guest member or when they're introducing like a new comedian, how do they go through the group stage development fast enough to be incorporated into the whole team?
Yeah, it's weird and getting weirder. If you look at 1975, there's like 6 or 7 cast members. Last year, there was 21, I think. They had enough for like 3 or 4 entire shows. So it's a lot harder to go through those stages because the team size is way bigger. Again, that question about, what do you do about these really large organizations, make them smaller. But the best tool that Lauren has for these new cast members is the 12:45 slot. Like, have you ever seen Wayne's World? No? Okay. Makes me old. It's really funny. And it started as a 12:45 sketch. It started as one of these sketches that just barely made it through the read-through and somehow snuck on to the show. But Lauren was like, I'm not going to put this in the first act. This thing's going to close the show right before the curtain call because he didn't think it was going to be very funny. And also, Mike Myers was brand new, so he wanted to give him an opportunity to be yeah. People have to be bad before they can be good, right? So just give them the 12:45 slot when all the people who stay up until Weekend Update are asleep. The real diehards are going to let us know, do I need to put this sketch on earlier on in the show? Mary.
So what surprised you most about your experience with this?
I think this level of structure that had this heaping absence of structure layered on top of it. Just this idea that, another thing that you hear over and over again, cast members aren't ever really sure that they got hired. Nobody ever says you're hired. Lauren will just say, hey, why don't you show up here on September 20th and we'll see how it goes. And then they show up and they're like, oh, I guess I am a cast member. So there's a lot of that. There's just so much ambiguity and they're just so okay with ambiguity. I can't tell you how many times I was just wandering around 8H like, so it's cool that I'm just standing here? Like, am I supposed to be somewhere? There's nobody holding my hand telling me I need to go here and then there. You just kind of have to follow the train. It's very loose, it's very open, it's very fluid, and yet very structured. That and Norm Macdonald couldn't keep it together until 11:30 at night. He was just a useless drunk. What else? Okay, I'm gonna shut it down then. Thanks everybody, this was fun.